my message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something.
We both took the same oath, you know, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that.
Well, it doesn't show how can I explain the thing we get to stay knowing that you're right, blinded by the light.
He is the free American, Clay Douglas.
Blinded by the light.
Catch the Free American weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern.
Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger wells inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon out of the sky and drop the sun. Why
For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I'm your host. I am Clay Douglas. I am the Free American. And my guest today is William Blair, Infraspect.org. Hello, William. How are you?
Good morning. It seems like it's going to be a very lively discussion.
Well, always is with you, and I tell you, I've got I've been lining up my whole week here. We've got we'll have you on several times, and I've mentioned here that the lawyers will be talking about the Bar Association being at the root of all of our problems, and I've got a few other little tidbits that I want to talk about. Part of our problems is our so-called patriot movement. I've got a story here from one of my guests that I've had on several times, a man by the name of Jim Fetzers, who did a book proving that the Sandy Hook was just a drill and nobody died at Sandy Hook. And one of our patriot broadcasters, Alex Jones, who bragged about the fact that he is Jewish, removed articles about Amazon censoring Jim Fetzer's book. And I've got one day next week, I've got Jim Fetzer coming on to explain the incredible actions by Amazon and why Alex Jones ripped down an article by one of his supposedly independent writers about and the whole Sandy Hook hoax was now being protected by Alex Jones. Following that, I've got a show about Big Pharma and the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, being one and the same. Here's supposedly part of our government that's protecting Big Pharma and people like, you know, the whole root of the Big Pharma poisoning us, killing millions of Americans, poisoning millions of Americans, and using companies like Monsanto to create poisonous food. I don't even know where to start. And behind all this, we've got the Bar Association protecting these big farmers and Monsanto while they poison Americans. Where do we even start here, William? I know you've got introspect. You've been trying to expose and protect the Indigenous Americans, what the unknowing and the program would call the American Indians, furthering the mistake that Columbus made. Didn't even know where he was going, didn't know where he was at, and was working for the working for the Catholic Church, and was actually one of the largest mass murderers in history, wasn't he?
Probably. By the time you get through three things that come to mind when you approach this. In other words, you're scoping, and you're looking at a very large, very complex and interrelated scenarios. And probably the number one problem on all of this is communications. And whether it's so-called social media or groups or spokespersons. Obviously today's topic is going to center around the so-called gun issues. The gun issues. I like that word, gun issues. And the framing of the debates on all of these matters you brought up is so skewed that it's not likely that any of the conversations are going to go anywhere other than what we call bitch and quit. In a public sense, people bitch and quit. And then the first thing that comes to mind is they say, well, the government has to do this and the government has to do that. The government has to protect me from them. And the thems have a very long list of criminalization or words that criminalize. And at some point, you have to stop it. You have to say, wait a second, we're going to break this down. You're characterizing somebody, you're disenfranchising them, or you're criminalizing them. And so what we've done in our audit process is we've devised ways, very comprehensive audits, that go in item by item. So when somebody starts demonizing someone, if I want to run a introspect media group and spokesman's believability rating, which is at introspect.org, then I'm going to take it apart. And by the end of the discussion or the deliberation, most people will just shut up. And the reason is because they're making fools out of themselves. They're showing exactly what they don't know in the interest of keeping it simple-minded. And at this point in America, people have been kept in a fairly good stupor. And the reason they're in a stupor is that they don't have a values program built into their rationale. They have a values neutral. They have a kind of a secular party line talk. The debates get framed and skewed into the dialectic kind of a competitive atmosphere among the jihads, and they oscillate. They switch sides and betray each other depending on what the gain is for the day. In the so-called gun issue, I've looked at this a long time. And I've seen it on reservations, and I've seen it in communities, and I'm quite aware of all of the approaches to looking at the judges and the lawyers and so forth. The president's pitch, the PR, the sophistry the conversational hypnosis always begins with something like Hillary Clinton would begin with, and that is the shock. The people are being killed everywhere in the streets. We have to protect you, and the American people have to do something. But when you look at what they say they're going to do in a political delivery, they abstract it down to where the words really don't have any fixity and meaning. And this is what happened with the president's most recent rhetoric. The points that he made, they call them the talking points or the political points, were pretty pathetic. And it went through a dialogue of requiring background checks for all sales. It went from there to, we're going to give you some pork barrel money, 20 million here, 20 million there. We're going to use medical evidence known as mental health reasons. The banning of the military style weapons is quite a wide array of words. The other sophistries include we're going to provide tools to the enforcement agencies, and they're going to close up the loopholes. The deter gun crime, is another nice abstract word, and I'll get back at these. I'll come back over them. The basis of their logic or their rationale is fairly clear. When you scope this, you say, okay, let's talk about this violence, this gun violence. Okay, let's talk about it in the context of where Obama, Clinton, and the various other personalities go. They always go global. Global issue, local solution. What that means is we're going to have a global authority and then we're going to apply it locally. So since we're going to scope at that level, we'll just line up the shootings, who does the shootings, who does the killings in America. Let's line those up with the extrajudicial gun killings across the globe and the gun drone strikes, unmanned aerial attack vehicle strikes. And then we'll start counting the body bags. The body bags in the drone strikes throughout their use far exceeds the killing of non-combatant innocent people on the streets of America. Now, we'll go back to the pharmaceutical soft kills shortly, but I'm making the point that we have a fake morality in this country, and it says the ruling class, those who are the deciders at the global level, can kill women, children, men with drone strikes. And we're going to kill them, and we're going to kill them because we suspect them of something. We're going to call that plausible guilt. And then we're going to move to potentiality prosecution. So we're thinking, well, they don't like America, they're anti-American sentiments, therefore we'll kill them. And there's something common to all of these conflicts. They're always in someone else's sovereign, and we're always burning the village to save it. Doesn't matter, Gaza, it could be South America, it could be everywhere.
It could be Waco, couldn't it? We had to kill those 17 little children to save them from a child molester.
Well, that was the false allegation. Certainly, there was no evidence to that, and that was all a fake.
Right.
And certainly one of the more notorious mass murders in history. And the Attorney General at the time and Clinton were certainly involved in that. And there's some very peculiar videotapes that show who shot who. The end of this comes back into a circle to plausible guilt scenarios and potentiality prosecution. And it comes back to referrals for treatment. What is treatment? What is the evidence for that treatment? In the plausible guilt scenarios, they're well listed, literally in the FBI types of offender and offenses. And those are well listed, and they've gone to a level where in circling everyone as a potential terrorist, potential shooter, whatever, they made a full circle back to themselves. In defining these acts and including these listings and labelings, it comes back to the people that are initiating the actions, and it sets them up for potentiality prosecution themselves. In other words, the lawyers and judges become the terrorists. When you go out and prosecute a fake war such as the drone strikes on people, it's not warfare because it's not asymmetrical. It's a purging action, global purging action on everyone who disagrees. And this goes into your behavior conformity models, and certainly we'll get into this Thursday, what the role of lawyers and judges actually is in the political courts, political, religious, consensus courts, I'm going to call them. Now, how it affects an individual here certainly goes into the Patriot definition. If you read the definition of what a terrorist is, first of all, it was a foreign power engagement, but now they've breached it into domestic homegrown terrorism through the acts and parallel authorities. And this basically means that it's really not going to be an asymmetrical warfare between soldiers. It's going to be urban warfare, or the new warfare, which is basically bioweather chemical interdiction campaigns and EMF and ELF and HARP technology. So you go to war with people using an interdiction campaign that incorporates the law or lack of law. It has scientists, it has religion, and it has politicians. When Hillary Clinton gets up and says, we're going to prosecute the savages, they're going to prosecute them. They're actually going to persecute them. They're not going to prosecute them, because prosecute would mean due process. So they just increase the number of drone strikes. And these are really nice because when you push the buttons on your little playtime computer, you really don't engage getting the blood on your hand of the targets that you killed. And you kill them. You pretend you're killing them like a little Game Boy thing that you can buy at the store. And then afterwards you go have lunch and go down to your friend's house and compare your values of your competition and who killed the most. And that's what you have in drone operators. Now, they're pretty well mind-controlled, oriented, brainwashed to think they're saving the world. Actually, they're not. They're not saving anything. They're not doing anything good at all. And it's very interesting that when they do a drone strike, kill people with a weapon, a gun, a high-tech gun, they get the therapy, and the people they strike get the body bags. So you're dealing with a dichotomy here, an aberration, a derangement in the process of orienting people to kill, actually to murder. And it's called extrajudicial killing, because you're not giving people due process. There's going to be a flaw in the domestic application. The flaw is this. In the law that the lawyers grab for every letter of the law, so does the Supreme Court justice, depending on which way they feel they want to go that day. In potentiality prosecution, in plausible guilt scenarios, very seldom will they teach people that they are the law. You can't do that anymore because it's not going to be good unless you're going to manipulate them. And the law is the collective organization of an individual's defense. And that's what it really is. And you can prove that through the sovereignty of individuals, whether it's a priest, a vote, a psychologist, whatever. The actual person, the individual person, is not under the law, they are the law. But they've taught people that the law comes from the supreme corporate state. Unfortunately for them, the thems, and they have a lot of names, there's things called case law. And case law goes in the Supreme Court of the United States, and it goes into little local jurisdictions, which are subdivisions. Like U.S. district attorneys are appointed. They're not elected into office, they're appointed. And they're promising to loyalty to the bar first and most, and loyalty to the political appointment party. And then they pretend that they have allegiance to the people where they really don't. Especially in the gun issue. The debate. Because it's been framed in a very careful way, and that is that the people are not going to have the same gun rights as the agents of the state, meaning the officials of the agencies, the departments, the divisions, the merc contractors that go out and shoot people with automatic weapons, ELF weaponry, EPP weaponry, EMF weaponry, and on and on and on. Now, when you're a citizen, you have the same arrest authorities that a police officer has. And the reason is you created him. He's a surrogate of you. He is supposed to have an allegiance to the people. To protect and serve has really become pretty much cats out of the bag as to who it protects and who it serves. Who are these people? In the case law, I'm just going to be very brief on this. It's about when can you shoot. And I have lined up in front of me 100 cases. 100 cases of when can you shoot. And there's some very particular things about a lawful. That means we're not being radical, we're not being extreme. I'm relating to laws. Laws that came from the promulgation of laws and the case law that applies. And in a nutshell, when an officer who pretends to be above the law is attempting to make an arrest, who abuses authority, transcends the bounds, uses unnecessary force and violence, they're doing it to a private individual, and they're doing it unlawfully as an individual in using that force and violence. And that was well spelled out in Jones versus the state. An illegal arrest is an assault and battery. So the person that's attempting to be restrained of his liberty has the same right to use force in defending himself as he would against repelling any other assault and battery. That means that agent is becoming a criminaloid. And that was stated in the State versus Robinson. Now, these are very, very important cases. And they're trying to revamp them to soften them up to the advantage of the corporate state in these latest remake of laws in the Midwest. Each person has the right to resist an unlawful arrest. In that situation, the person attempting the arrest stands in the position of a wrongdoer and may be resisted by the use of force, as in self-defense. And that's the state versus Mobley. Now, here comes the one that they don't want the public to know about. It's Plummer versus the state. Citizens may resist unlawful arrest to the point of taking the arresting officer's life as necessary. That was held up by the Supreme Court of the United States in the John Badell case. Then it goes into the remedies and all these case law things where you can actually go in and get damages, injuries, and punitive damages on a very particular basis. But what I'm talking about is that a person can take the life of a bad situation to preserve their own life. And if you see someone being shot down that's armed in the street in an execution style, and believe me, it's going to get more so in this country, not less, because the police officers are mind controlled to think that they're paramilitary. In other words, under the Capstone Doctrine, they've turned the peace officer into a military quasi-contractor officer. In a lot of cases, like on reservations, they actually are mercs because their entire court system is contracted to a corporation. That includes the officers, the bailiff, the judges, everybody. So you're really dealing with people that hide behind immunities. And now this is where I'm going with this. It's time to take away their immunities, absolute and limited. Now these court cases are very clear. You can shoot them, you can hit them in the head, you can put them down, you can restrain them, you can duct tape them, whatever it takes to preserve life you can do. You can use force. Doesn't mean that they're going to be happy. It doesn't mean it's fair and balanced. It doesn't mean it's politically correct and we run around with this, oh, we're all not going to be violent garbage. Because the Bible is violent. You know, we're back to talking about the Northwest Ordinance and how people put a state in place, a diocese in place. So it's violent. There's violence built in. The U.S. Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and all the laws and statutes and codes of the states and the United States are violent. They have violent means in them. They have violent instruments in them. They have prosecutions that are violent, such as capital punishment, violent. So these are like violent rhetoric, a violent attitude, a violent rhetoric. And what has been used is a propaganda, sort of brainwashing, values washing, that the only people that are entitled to violence are the authorities, including the merc. And this has to be breached. The immunity has to be breached. So where do you breach it? You breach it from the top to the bottom. You breach the immunity, the facade of immunity. And there's ways to do that with presidents, lawyers, judges, attorneys, agents of any corporation, because you can go through that veil of immunity which passes the immunity onto these officers under the guise of law is to the advantage of the majority or the supreme will of the state.
Let me ask you a question here.
Go ahead.
This is the reason, I think, that they are so frightened and come down so hard on the bikers. Because if we really take care of ourselves, we get along fine with the police that are being in their place and doing their job. We don't mind them stopping us and giving us a ticket as long as they're respectful and they're not trying to step out of their bounds. But what happened in what I call Waco 2, where they just opened fire on a peaceful meeting of bikers, they had no business doing that. And the reason they did that, and the reason we've had so many problems with the police and the bikers, is they're afraid of us.
Well, they're not afraid. They're not afraid of anybody.
Okay.
You're dealing with sociopaths, psychopaths, and they have non-asymmetrical capacity. The gun issue is almost irrelevant when you think about a gun, a handgun, an assault weapon, or these weapons that are being marketed on a very lucrative scale. It isn't, it's not that the American public is armed up as one of the most armed people. That's important. But think about this. How much ammunition do they have? And really not much. Not much in any terms of a tactical or strategic military style engagement. So what I'm getting at is that we have to stay focused on the skewing, the special stagger that's being put into weapons rights. In other words, the responsible rhetoric goes to that the officer's been trained to use a weapon, and that we will have the underclass trained to a lesser degree, and they will not get tactical weapons. And that goes to warfare, not asymmetrical warfare. It goes to warfare, and that's important as a pre-incident indicator. And it's important then that we approach the idea of martial law. Martial law is misunderstood. The people think that are running the clans profess that they can take away guns in martial law, and that's not true. Especially given that martial law is in a situation where you have a very high risk. At that point, you arm people up so that they can defend each other. The biggest risk to the American public, certainly under the tripwire model, would be their own neighbor. If there is a pandemic, whether it's disease or whether it's an event, a weather event or so forth, natural or induced, people are going to be the biggest risk to themselves. The military will stand back under a policy of managing sectarian tensions in the interior. They'll wait for people to identify themselves, let the flowers bloom, and then they'll go in and eliminate people that suits their design purposes. Once again, let me go back and make a circle here, very important. You have a right of resistance. Each person has a right of resistance, and that's built into all of those very violent instruments that have been created in America. Ordinances, codes, laws, constitution, so forth. And it says basically that it can approach a just revolt against despotic actions. In other words, when the actions get so bad by your government that they're violent. The government does violence against the Constitution every time it commits signorage, meaning it gives away powers that were not vested in the people in the first instance. And the judges and lawyers know this, but their loyalty doesn't lie with the sovereign people. It lies with the paycheck, and it lies with their obedience to their fraternity. The violations of liberty, certainly liberty is a covenant. It's not a regulation. Although the ACLU, ADL, and Southern Poverty Law Center are very keen on turning liberty into limited and supervised rights in the interest of that which is to the advantage of the majority. Now understand this, the people writing these gun laws, these so-called gun laws, weapons laws, they belong to a fraternity already. It's called the Bar Association. The British Administrative Registry is well known. And really, when they step outside the judiciary, they should not even be a member of the bar, but they are. And in that loyalty to the bar, they go through a filtering, kind of a storefront process, where you have the American Bar Association and the Indian Bar and this and that and all these local associations. But really, it's called the Lawyers Guild of being a branch of the Communist Party. That's it. That's history. That's lawful history. Now, I want to touch on this because the tripwire is in progress. They're not going to take the guns. They're already taking them, and they do it by a very interesting rat maze kind of a management scenario. I'll give you an example. When you have a federal right to a weapon, you can't cross a border with it, a screening point, without finding yourself in violation of several laws. And in other words, they start putting little restrictions on how you handle the gun, where do you keep the gun, and so forth. So it's just a long, slippery slope to the point where you actually have people saying, well, we're going to have to keep your weapons in an armory until it comes to the point of recreational use, such as hunting. And that's why they're very careful to keep hunting, not in food gathering, but in recreation, because recreation does not have the same weight and value. Probably one of the more hideous, slippery techniques of the rat maze is when people get into domestic violence, the attorneys go to work quickly on plea bargains. And the reason is to save the state from spending money on the case. And they get in and they plea bargain and they say, well, you can literally go in and get a checklist. It's a checklist, a little box, check, 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 check. And that's to justify, that's your declaration to get your protection order. The state issues a protection order. And what they tell the person is this, automatically, right down the line is, are there guns in the house? First, one of the very first things of business they get out of the way first, are there guns in the house? And then you check the boxes, and then it says, check this box, I was afraid for my life. You don't have to prove it. You don't have to go to court to do anything. You get the protection order, even with the other alleged criminal person. You don't have to do any of that. You just check the box, and then they go to the person and say, well, to avoid a lengthy weaponized prosecution, we want you to give up your weapon for 10 years, your gun rights. They don't even say weapon, they say gun rights, your right to bear and have arms. Then you sign off on that. And in 10 years after you've been drawn into, say, a child custody battle, they can manufacture, attorneys and judges can manufacture joint custody plans that eliminate guns to even being in proximity to the children. And I'm looking at some of this stuff in Oregon right now where these are really, really dishonest ways, they're fraudulent ways of getting the guns, disarming the target. Now, the scenario they're thinking is all violence is bad. Now, wait a second. We're drone striking, we're killing people massively all over the planet, and I'm staying in this context because I'll come back to the food thing and food deserts. But I'm talking about the drone strikes because it's intentional, it's planned, it's protracted, it's executed, including the unarmed, innocent people they hit. So that's violence. And then we come home to violence where the orientation of the officer being a paramilitary person, in other words, they combined him under capstone, he's a military-trained domestic officer. Now the words in this, and we go into a great detail, we identify all the kinds of policing, such as community policing. And this is something Obama hit on in his words. And these are not just little happy words, so the folk in the Shire can understand them. These are words that mean something. And he's sending a signal to the prosecutors and the lawyers, here's where to go to work. He's not talking to the American public. There, you just keep them in the stupor, keep them afraid, and you got it made. He's talking to the agents, the change agents. And he's saying, here's what we're going to do, and you got my backing on this. So if somebody gives you a guff, you just call Washington, and we'll go from there. We'll make their life hell. And so you end up with non-violence. Don't think violent. We must all be happy. Well, a lot of the black leadership gets out there, and they talk about black-on-black killings and everything else. And we're always focused on the civilian gun violence. And that's on purpose. The black people that have been killed, murdered in the streets, any reasonable person who would review the videotapes would say it was a murder. But always the state takes care of its own. And that's their policy. That is the judicial policy. The officer, even if he kills them wrongfully, we must keep the institution in place. We must keep force of law in place, because our system is breaking down in terms of the predatory economy. The economy isn't breaking down all by itself. The predatory economy is breaking down. And what is a predatory economy? And we list it. We describe it in the intrusions case file and the Indigenous identity theft brief. We tell you what a predatory economy is. And this is what people are suffering under. But it has a definition. And it has a method to its madness, and this one goes all the way into the food deserts and the property takings and all kinds of aspects. Now, I'm going to come back to this again. How do you get to where you justify, everyone has to be nonviolent, and it goes into plausible guilt scenarios. Plausible guilt scenarios are listed in the FBI manuals, and in front of me I have those manuals, and as well as the analysis of them, and you start listing people as type of offenders and offenses. But carefully in this, offenders and offenses does not include the authorities, the rich, the high economic social classes, and government classes, which enjoy, even when they murder wrongfully, enjoy immunity, absolute immunity, such as in the court cases that describe the officers as having absolute immunity. That's a lie. That's perjury. They don't. And I just read the court cases that deal with that. So we come back to labeling, listing type of offenses and offenders. Second Amendment people certainly are offenders. They're people that do not go into values neutral, morally vacant kind of values, such as transhumanism, where you no longer even have a right to be a man or a woman. And that's what that's about. So if you object to that or you resist it, you become a violent person. And you had violent thoughts. You had a violent, dangerous attitude. So we go from mere difference all the way to the extremes so we can prosecute the potentiality. Potentiality prosecution is the kingpin of the ADL structure. And that is basically that you go in and potentiality prosecution would be such as I mentioned in the domestic violence, where you go in and you just checklist it. You don't need to prove it. The person never gets to face their accuser. You just plea bargain it, and they say, we have more resources and money than you, and if you don't agree to this, we'll prosecute. Well, what goes through the mind of the innocent person is they look over at their public defender lawyer and say, I'm screwed. I'm going to get screwed in court because this guy isn't going to do anything to upset his loyalty to the bar and the benefits of that franchise. So you're out. So you try to defend yourself, and all of a sudden your status is reduced. You're not as good as the lawyer sitting over there. He knows more than you, and that's not true. I've met a lot of lawyers that don't even know the definition of law. Civil rights lawyers that are out there helping all the folk in the Shire with their affirmative action and their protected group status.
Let me interrupt you for just a second, William, because I was under contract with a company, a corporation out of Las Vegas to build motorcycles for them. And I put the corporation together, and then they brought in a CEO that was a fool, and I refused to work with him. Told him, if you put this guy up, who was somebody's brother-in-law, I said, you're gonna go out of business. You're gonna lose. And they sued me to keep me from writing about them, because I'd already put a company out of business by writing about them. And I went before them. I went before the judge, countersued them, and I went before the judge and went behind the bar, and the lawyer looked over at me and said, are you Mr. Douglas's attorney? And I said, no, I'm Mr. Douglas. And he said, Your Honor, this is the defendant. Can't you make him hire an attorney? And the judge looked at me, and I said, Your Honor, if you'll read my countersuit here, I think you'll agree that I'm perfectly capable of defending myself. I'd be happy to hire a lawyer, but they owe me money, and I can't afford to hire an attorney, so just read my brief. And he looked at the lawyer, and he said, no, I can't make him hire an attorney. And I won the case.
That's breached in all, and these days the breach is there. Certainly in Indian country, they run in the bar lawyer, even on treaty matters, which lawyers have absolutely no business in. They do a lot of negotiation on this so-called alternative dispute resolution. The first order of business when you walk into a hostile court is you force the judge to recuse themselves. You examine who you're dealing with. First, the judge and the attorneys, the bailiff, the prosecutor, everybody. You examine the court officers, and you pinpoint the ones that are going to have prejudicial, biased issues there, and you take them out. Then you go back, and the next squad they sent in, you evaluate them the same way, and you look for their defects in their probable prejudice or bias. And understand this, that you're not dealing with people that are fair and objective. You're dealing with people that are political, social, fraternal, religious, and with vested monetary interests. That's when you walk into court, that's what happens. But they don't want you to think about that, because that's about what do judges and lawyers do. And I have a 40-page audit sheet that I give people on what are lawyers really, how do they go to school, what are they doing, what is their performance, what are they like. So you have to engage first that executive kind of a function where you actually get the courtroom in order, because you are an officer. When you went to speak to that judge, you became a court officer with all of the rights and privileges of an officer of the court. And the lawyers don't want you to know that, because the game is on. If you were to choose three personalities that want guns taken away by disciplinary personality, which ones want guns taken away? Just name three.
Politicians, lawyers, and bankers, I would say.
Banker, you know, and you could say they're functionary, the media, because these people all kill more than people can with guns. They steal more than people can steal with guns, and that's the facts. That's history. As we get into this and we keep moving, we get into why they're blowing up people with drone strikes. These are weapons of mass destruction. That's what they're intended to be. And the idea, the derangement that's involved in their serial warfare engagement is collective punishment. Collective punishment is what you do when you prosecute a group. You want to go after a group. It's called group defamation. You go after them, either pro or con. The unarmed civilians, their energy, medical facilities, food services, all of this, bear this in mind because we'll come back to it a little later. It's all part of the persecution of the war on terror. The war on terror is about behavior conformity. It's a state of mind warfare. You prosecute a target for what they may or may not think, feel, say. Now, what that sets off is exactly what we're getting. Southern California, it doesn't matter, it's just getting started. And the amateur terrorists, the jihadists, or whatever they want to call them, they have to label them something, so they might as well be, really are people, and they have things happen to them in their life experience. Now, some are totally justified. Now, in XREL, in the law, if you're not there and somebody murders you, the state takes revenge, retribution. They call it justice. And they go after the criminal, even though you're gone. And so they don't need you to prosecute the case. You're just a witness. In the war on terror, you don't even need any of that. You don't have due process. You don't have a trial. You have nothing. So the people what are they really teaching them when they do extrajudicial killings, arrests, the drone strikes? They're teaching them that America does not respect a system of justice, and certainly not due process of law and proof of evidence and elements of criminality. They just get a state of mind, and we will demonize the whole group into collective punishment, and we'll make them appear to be military. So we will have to militarize their personality. Well,
I have said, William, that the war on terror, for many years now, I have said the war on terror is a war against anyone, anywhere in the world, including the United States, that opposes one world government of the banksters, by the banksters, and for the banksters.
That's true, and the redacted FBI offenses go to that, as well as type of offenders, and I'm very particular about listing those things as they actually are. But it's important to understand that when you do these crimes against an individual, just as if you were to shoot a black man on the street, which seems to be a pattern, whether it's false flag or whether it's actual, it's hard to say, because we got too many mind control programs out there running, high-tech programs that can influence people's mind. Now, with these things are known, when people finally get to, they say, okay, we're going to go back against this. You're not dealing with asymmetrical warfare. You're dealing with individuals that come back and may have lost their families, communities, and so forth, and they come back with blowback, revenge, retribution, and reprisal. And for the assaults on the people, the man, the woman, the children, the culture, their social gatherings, such as blowing up wedding parties. Come on, America, wake up. You're morally bankrupt. And it's your fault. And you're using the authorities to cover for you. That's a statement I'm being very adamant about. Now, within the capstone doctrine, D5E, it says you can do everything. You just said it. What you described when you said the war is on everybody, everywhere who dissents, that's true. And the actual doctrine is capstone, interoperability, internationally, Merck, military, and it's called the D5E protocols. And it includes the extrajudicial killing and everyone else. And if we have to use it, we do it. We pretend that we're going to cooperate and be kind and everybody's on board and everybody's a partner. But at the moment that they don't go with it, then under the things like the Delphi technique of the mind, it's a cult technique. As soon as that appears in the people, you start the isolation, the alienation, disenfranchising, expatriation. And to have going to another country's sovereign, going to the people and say, well, they're not good patriots. There's a difference between loyalty among crooks and thieves and murderers and actually what a patriot is. And I want to mention this, it's very important because it slips through when the people are in a stupor. The Patriot Act doesn't define patriot. What is wrong with that? That's an issue. We can't just pass it over and say, oh, gee, that was wonderful that William brought this up as a little defect. It's not a little defect, it's a great big defect. You have to define patriot, and it's not in Black's Law Dictionary. It isn't there. You're not going to find patriot in Black's Law Dictionary. Why? Why, with all this stuff being fed into the minds of who's a patriot and personal security and everything on the planet, why is patriot not defined lawfully? And I can give you an answer to that based on my observations globally to locally. But anyway, I'm going to move into another area here, and that goes to mental health. Mental health, the things that the talking heads are doing and so forth, really is about oppositional defiance disorder and obedience defiance disorder. Both are manufactured in the World Health Organization DMS 4 and 5 manuals, and basically they eased it in through the 11 to 17-year-olds so they could target them. Now, why are they targeting 11 to 17-year-olds? Well, pretty much Head Start is taking care of orienting them to values neutral and non-judgmental and peer pressure. But 11 to 17-year-olds, you're going to start to actually see a little bit of brain activity there, judgmental activity. And they are exposed to schools and teachers and society and the media, and they start to ask questions. And the media, the schools as contingency managers, and their parents as basically just agents, don't know what to say for the most part. They don't know what to technically say to the children. So the kids get a little teenage behavior going, and what happens is that they are in resistance, they're oppositional. And so the school system comes in, and this is what Obama is obviously following. He didn't invent it, it's been around a long time. And what they do is say, well, we have to refer them for treatment. And this has been, they try to focus you on the abuse of cash for kids and stuff like that. But really, what's really dangerous is not that, because you can prosecute that. You can catch them, and the public will actually agree to a prosecution. What's really going on is in the legal part is the treatment. And the treatment is part of the D5E protocol stuff, the military civil engagement, and it's evidentiary in the Pandemic and All Hazardous Preparedness Act. It's in the acts that Obama's mentioned in the, literally I've got it in front of me, the Community-Oriented Policing Services, the Consumer Product Safety Commission activities, and the Affordable Care Act and Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. Now, these are all nice titles and they smell good and taste good, but in them are buried things that are traveling and are not transparent, because the mind of people that promote these things will keep the people that are debating and framing it fixed away from the real issues, the real matters that are causing the problems. So what they do is they create the problem and they manage the solutions at the same time. Now, as you move through this treatment, you'll find that while they talk about the drug addiction, actually they are addicting people to drugs in a wide array of kinds of drugs. That includes food. Food can be medicine. Medicine can be food, nutrients. And they can enter you by a market delivery system, such as nicotine, or they can enter you through a chemical dispersal program, aerobatic, in water and so forth. The delusion that lithium is good for you and all these things don't hurt you is delusional, but if you repeat it constantly, as Hitler found, the people from the Shire, the sumptuary class, that means the consumer class under law, they will agree with it because they burn out. And that's a dissonance. It's a cognitive thing. They burn out. They don't want to fight anymore. They just give up. And that includes senators and lawyers and so forth. This is probably the most serious part of the gun, so-called the gun control thing. The gun, it's a nice vehicle. Everybody panics. Oh, they're going to come in, and I'm going to be down at the porn studio, and there was a shooting at the porn studio. You don't get a shooting at the porn studios. Why don't you get a shooting at the porn studios? If this is a military engagement, why are not the terrorists targeting military institutions? And the reason is that you have a constructive atmosphere where the target is the civilians, and the amateur warfare terrorists are driven by a hatred and anger more than they are tactics and strategy. They're not hitting the military. These people are into revenge and reprisal. You killed my family, my community, I'm going to come back and kill yours. That's what the idea is. But they don't go after the military. So we're not dealing with asymmetrical warfare. We're dealing with suicide bombers and the like. And that tells me that they're weak, that they're not strong, and that they're desperate. And the same thing will occur here. As you'll see, the more desperate people get in this country, you'll start seeing the suicide bomber come in more so. It's not asymmetric. People are saying, I've had it, I'm out of here, I'm going to commit suicide, and I'm going to take the perceived enemy with me. Those are the things that are really going on behind the scenes. The manuals that tell how to do this, everything, they're real, and they're very well reflected, because when you're dealing with a TIA database, DARPA, that goes into a massive amount of intelligence operations, as we've well described in 797 pages of the brief, and the references, pretty well qualifies that we're not BSing anybody. We're telling people what we have found, and that's what we do. We provide information to clients. The gun safety product thing is what's really going on when you have all these lockdown effects. It's not just to put a key on your gun closet. It goes into the fact that you cannot leave a loaded gun in your vehicle when you're traveling, even though you have a gun permit or something like that. And it goes back to the rat maze, very gradual system of disarming the folk from the Shire. And those folks are the ones that the little light bulb comes on in their brain and they go, wait a second, this isn't true, this is false, and what are we going to do about it? Unfortunately, the sentiments drive people because they're not trained to respond. That brings me to the next item. This item is when you have people that have left the military, and part of it, if you leave the military and you blew the whistle on a killing in the Middle East, a murder or rape, you're not going out on honorable discharge particularly. You're going to be discharged. That means you can't have a gun. And they go around and any vets that speak up, appear at rallies or anything like that that are anti-foreign policy, they're going to find themselves being screened into through their veterans benefits programs into medical stuff. And in that process, the evaluator will come in and say that they're a risk. And if in that process, they will tell them, you're giving up your guns and we're going to come and take them. Now, that isn't the reason. That's the rationale. The reason is that when you have a bunch of trained soldiers that go home and they already are wise to what the racket of war is about, they can train other people. And they can also act as soldiers with that sort of discipline and resocialization. In other words, they acquire the target and they pull the trigger. They don't stand around and say, oh, gee, I just took somebody's life. They're not into that. They've already been trained to kill. I'm an ex-vet. I'm an ex-cop. And I was trained to shoot people, not targets. That's the way it is. And that's called resocialization. So as I walk away from that and I get older, I've walked away from that and said, well, rather than go do all those stupid, violent things and just demise my family and friends, I'll go in and look at this from a different way. And that's how, and one of the parts of why we went into the InfraSpect idea and developed an audit system. Because we know where it all comes home. It comes to homes that roost on the lawyers. That includes the Supreme Court justices, local district judge, circuit judges, lawyers that are both judicial and corporate. These are the people that are carefully hiding behind the cops. They tell the cops, go shoot them. We'll defend you. Okay, and you've got immunity. So they go into court and they come up against a pro bono or a court-appointed lawyer that isn't going to argue against the system. He's going to pretend that he's actually taking care of due process and the rights of his defendant, and usually indigent defendant. The people that are targeted, and this goes from the, kind of the weaponized prosecution thing, and when I was talking about the vets, to read the language, it's a slow, gradual process of advancing to that difference is prosecuted. In other words, the end game is any difference will be prosecuted. It's under the theory of uniformity. And the Vatican has already moved in to the UN and made it clear that they're going to resolve the differences between religions on the planet. Now, what does that mean? That means that faith and their partner religious organizations are going to rid the planet of Muslim and Islam and anyone who steps out of line from the Temple of Understanding, which is part of the Lucius Trust. So what you have is the jihad over here prosecuting the jihad over there. That's what's going on. They're all jihads. And we can prove that by substance and fact.
One question for you.
Go ahead.
It took me 50 years to even get recognized by the VA. And part of the problem was that I was discharged pretty early in my career. That because I got spinal meningitis right after I signed up for Officers Candidate School. And I didn't get it, and I was pretty upset about it. I went into the testing in NCO, and I pounded on his desk, and I said, I want to know why I didn't get into Officers Candidate School. I've never failed a test. He said, oh, you didn't fail a test. You scored so high on the test that they won't let you be an officer. I said, what do you mean? You only let stupid people become officers? He said, oh, no, but anyone with your IQ will question orders. Is that something standard here? I mean, they refused me medical care, they refused me VA benefits, and I was told when I got out that they were going to give me benefits, and I was going to get a pension. I didn't get the pension for 50 years. Is that standard?
Yeah.
What happened?
They have SBN codes. In other words, when you're on your DD-214 and you're discharged, it sends a signal to all of the agents out there that understand this, the corporate people, including the RAND Corporation and many others, Intel, Google, all of them understand the codes that when you come out of the service, you're profiled. And what really they were looking at was you were more intelligible than intelligent. In other words, you could be trained skills, but when you're going to be intelligible, that shows that you're thinking about thinking, like George Carlin used to say, I'm thinking about thinking.
One of my favorite comedians.
You were actually reasoning. Now let me move into this, who's going to be not getting the firearms. It's very important because this is where it's going, and people and listeners need to comprehend the words. You can't run out there and make this happy face for the Shire people. It isn't going to work. They're not going to understand anything, and that's what these political personalities play to. And their agents always, change agents always say, well, can we just make this simple? You know, it's too much, and no, that's not true. People can balance their checkbook and how much they made at their paycheck down to a half a cent, but they can't determine values. Now, there's classes of people that are going to get targeted on the taking out the weapons. And within those classes, understanding the criteria, pre-decisional criteria, pretty much makes all of the legislation look as if it's following something. It's not starting something. It's not a preponderance of facts. We're going to change the gun legislation because of minority incidents, not a preponderance of incidents, not a widespread thing. We have less violence in this country than any other country, but we're already on the gun campaign. We're going to get those guns. And there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of tactical, strategic reasons why they want the guns, and then we can go into that on pre-incident indicators down the road. The people that are convicted of crimes and imprisoned that are under 2 years are probably pretty much they're not going to be able to get a gun permit, but they aren't going to have to give up their weapons in now, per se. Fugitives of justice include homeless people. And I have sat right there and listened to the federal officers say it. These are homeless and they're fugitives. So the reason people are gathering together in these conclaves for the homeless is not to protect themselves from being mugged and somebody stealing their possessions under the highway bridge. They're being collected together to protect themselves from the police authorities who are using the military civilian protocols on them, including they are fugitives just because they're homeless. The terminology unlawful users is pretty ambiguous, pretty vague, and they look at depressants, narcotics, and stimulants. Now, the pharmaceutical companies certainly have made sure that the family of drugs that have caused many sociopathic personalities and psychopathic events certainly don't want to fess up to that, and some of your mass murders certainly were on drugs that stimulate psychopathic events. The mental defects include the oppositional and obedience disorders out of the World Health Organization. And bear in mind, the UN says this in their charter. And notice that word charter. Charter is a corporate paper. And they say it, that we're the final decision maker. We make the decisions. Well, they pretend they're going to protect all the people of the Shire. That's not true. The dishonorably discharged people, they certainly will have to give up their weapons. The other things go into the gun education things, like if you're over this age, you can get a little weapon, but if you're over that age, you can get a bigger weapon. And then it goes into purchasing firearms and transferring ownership from one person to the other. And that's something that all they're doing is an omnibus sweep on the exchange of weapons. Now, it has to be understood that criminals are not into obeying, heinous criminals are not into the obey the law thing. They're going to get weapons, knives, guns, sticks, rocks, whatever, and they're going to commit the crimes with whatever means they can. The majority of crimes and frauds in America are electronic. And in all of these things, you're not seeing any emphasis or attention put on that. The prosecutors are stymied and stifled and obstructed on a continuing basis on all white-collar crime. Because if it makes money, it's legal. And I was told that by a mob lawyer out of Las Vegas. He says, that's the law. If it makes money, it's legal. Now, the weapons that really don't mean much, meaning the ones that can't get through the Kevlar and the body armor, they are going to have a lesser requirement on them. It isn't that there's these kind of weapons are actually really potentially long range. You can shoot your neighbor with a shotgun. You can disable him or kill him. That's it. But that shotgun is not likely to pierce body armor or military style defenses. The domestic violence, this is an important stagger in their doublethink. Domestic violence is treated basically, to get your gun, it has to become a felony. To get your gun right, it has to be a felony. But they pretend that it's a misdemeanor. We're going to convict people convicted of misdemeanors. We're going to have special limitations on their guns and so forth. They can't get a concealed weapons permit per se. But really, these are, to take that gun, it's a felony level issue. It has to be treated as a felony because you're now dealing with constitutional provisions. And the states can play this pretend sovereign card all they want, but they're not. It's a limited sovereignty, and there's particular legal words that explain that I've put into the briefs. And essentially, they have to give way to your federal constitutional rights. And that's true, and the Supreme Court will overturn them any time that they impugn or obstruct your constitutional rights. The states are dioceses. They're estates. They're subdivisions of the United States. And they consented to that. They consented it in the origination of the states. To become a state, they had to subscribe to the Northwest Ordinance, which was very particular about being Christian and Christian precepts, which basically took it back to the Church of Rome and so forth, the cult of Rome. The expungement of records, the things that are going to be involved with this gun registration, this management, aren't going to happen. Once you're into the system, you're there permanently. They're not going to get rid of it. You're going to be in there with your records permanent, and they can set aside a conviction. They can do all this blah blah before the court, but nevertheless, once you've been involved with domestic violence or anything like that, you're in the system permanently, and the matter goes to espionage. These are all about intelligence gathering on weapons. But what happens in the process of gathering the intelligence product, which is copyrighted by the agencies, it's transferred, sold, and purchased as a product to the collaborative surveillance system among corporations. So really the Medical Privacy Act, is really right in the middle of this, because there isn't any medical privacy. And your confidentiality of your medical records is gone, and that will be under the mental health provisions. When you go in and look at the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act, it literally takes you back to the parallel authorities, all the way back to the Executive Order 51 and so forth. You're really looking at a wide array of parallel authorities, and prosecutors and judges and lawyers can draw on that just about the way they want. And if you go in and give them your opening brief with a suitcase full of money, you're going to get your due process at a little higher degree. All of this has to be taken in the context that their premise, their theory, is to remove violence. And that's not true. The only violence that they're going to remove is any potential violence against them if they are despotic, tyrannous, unlawful. That's what's happening. And that it goes into the tripwire. And the tripwire is in progress. It's just gradual. Weaponized immigration, those people coming in through the borders, they're not going to get their gun rights. That isn't going to happen. They're going to sign agreements and waivers and all kinds of things if they want to be a citizen that go way beyond what is the law right now. And they're going to be profiled, and they're going to have to submit to extensive interview and evaluation and data research on them through the Total Information Awareness Fusion Centers, which have just about everything. So really, in his latest endeavor, the president as the executive is just doing kind of a mop-up operation on totality, which would be called full spectrum dominance. And that's what's going on. They're just doing a mop-up operation. From what I can see in the proposals and the actual language, a lot of these authorities already exist. These paradigms exist lawfully. They're just cleaning up the last more important aspects of taking the guns so that when they walk out, they rely on one thing. The code revisers will not be able to purge everything if there is an actual blowback and a reform in the country on rights and liberties and so forth. It's going to take a task force of very expert analysts that understand language and then go in and do the searches electronically to purge the parallel authorities, because all this is going to do is move forward. And the concept of full spectrum dominance, total information awareness is throughout all of the documents, and the gun issue is just a good avenue to take this on. It's kind of like global warming. It hasn't been totally revealed, but the jihad of science is moving fast to prosecute climate deniers.
Now, you mentioned early on here something about a food desert. I've got a link up on my website by a guy in Oakland, I believe he's Oakland, who talks about, who's been trying to go into vacant lots. He said there's more vacant lots in Oakland, San Francisco area, that he's been trying to go in there and plant food. And he talks about the fact that there's more people dying from food deserts, from the drive-throughs, than the drive-bys. And he also says that if you plant your own food in these vacant lots, that it's like printing your own money. And it's a black man says he's tired of watching his neighbors die from this food here. Can you elucidate a little bit on the idea of a food desert? What does that mean to us?
It's certainly, it goes back into franchising, economic channeling. Probably one of the most glaring examples of food deserts are the federal Indian reservations. And obviously, austerity is programmed in, keeping in a welfare state situation, a failed reservation state. And then as they pretend to move all of the services, the welfare state services, over to the state authorities, they bring in a lot of food and energy assistance programs and so forth. But nevertheless, it stays a predatory economy, meaning the food deserts don't have a lot of really nutritious, locally grown food. They pretend. They come on with a few social justice programs. They make it look good. They're high-cost programs. And the participation usually ends up failed in the end, because it doesn't answer people in their estates. It answers the group. The group has to do this. The group has to do that. The problem with the Bay Area and these Oakland things and all these little things are the activities of the people are blowback for a failed system, just like the reservation failed state where you have food deserts. Now, within the reservation exhibits, what we looked at was that the retail products and services were codependent on mainstream sources to support non-traditional activities, casinos, travel services, ranch resort, colleges, gas, propane stores, cafes, recreational tourism outfitters, chemical products. And it manifests itself into burrito places and all these different things, marts, Subway, and all of these people come in and they are primarily engaged with the distribution of products, and they have to have a long-term shelf life in transport and on the shelf. In other words, it's got to be subject to preservatives and all of these sorts of things. And the outfall of this is carefully concealed by a myriad of ways. But nevertheless, the CDC and the pharmaceuticals usually have what they call a event calendar, and the doctors are supposed to report these outbreaks and everything on the events calendar. But the diabetes is not being connected to the events of all the fast food, all of that. It's not being done, and the reason is it would interfere with the economic channeling from these people. A lot of the fast food organizations are starting to put on and develop their happy face, environmentally green and correct and all of this, but they're not. And the main problem is they're still reliant on a distant source of supplies, probably halfway around the world, depending on where the food is actually packaged, such as Mexico has a big industry in packaging airline food. And the big thing there is, once again, we got to keep a long shelf life on it so we can maximize the profit off that. And the way you do that is packaging and chemical treatments. The cultural events range from food gathering to recreational opportunity spectrums. So you don't have people in Indian reservations really getting a lot of fish and game. In fact, in the Lakota situation, they're coming up with gimmicks like we're going to issue 1 buffalo per household or something. Well, that doesn't solve any problems. That just issues the meat as a subsidy against their failed reservation status because people can't afford to buy the other things. So you see a lot of commodities distribution is actually big business on reservations. It's kind of like watching these called food for this and food for that, food for the county. You'll see that they're really in business. They're really in a profit-making business, and that's their number one corporate concern. The behavior health programs are certainly always subjected to the drug cartels, the pharmaceuticals. So as we will see a spin-off business come in through the gun legislation, you'll just see an increased use of pharmaceuticals to keep people in a public obedience stance. In other words, the pharmaceuticals is part of the nutrient thing. It is part of the treatment. And when you go into the reservation failed food desert, you're going to see a lot of treatment of people. In other words, they don't have good food. They don't have the food they need, particularly to help them and nourish them and be prosperous. They merely come in and literally experiment. It's at an epidemic level already, and is the free distribution of experimental psychotropics. Now, we've gathered some specimens, and since we gave these to the people, we're able to acquire them without a big debate, a legal debate. In other words, there's no confidentiality. They just gave them experimental drugs. Okay, you got a food desert on your hands, you got a spiritual desert, you got an economic desert. Take this pill. It'll make you feel better about yourself. And then they get into a stupor, and they don't care. And one of the biggest things on reservations is buy-in. Don't upset the chain, the benefits chain. The information that we look at when you start looking at poverty and all of these things pretty much substantiate what we're talking about, the material hardship in this modern era. I don't mean the 1900s, I mean now. And as I scope through this, I can see, the case demonstrations. Why is TANF there? Temporary assistance to needy families. Why is it there? Because the food desert, the cultural desert, the economic desert, the spiritual desert is in play. To such a point that the casinos, we've witnessed this and filmed the payoffs, or millions of dollars were going out of one casino every month, and the payoffs to the tribal authorities. And we're just going to let that play, because sooner or later they're going to get caught by the authorities, and they won't be able to fight the authorities. But the casino culture is now treated as an income source when you go in to gamble. That's interesting, isn't it? And they're exempt to a large degree from audit. And this has to do with evaluating for state tax and revenue sharing. A lot of the casino compacts are sharing money back and forth and benefits to the non-Indian community and agencies. So they actually become a replacement for really a good, healthy, and prosperous self-employment or employment. And the mannerism inside really infringes. When you go into a casino culture, you will see Spirit Mountain, the casino. You'll see motifs of Indian women wearing very little, which is not traditional. It's not cultural. It's not customary, but it sells. Excuse me. It sells to the non-Indian snowbirds, the retirement class, the fixed income class, and all the way down off I-5, you can look at the desert, the cultural desert inside of the casinos. And usually you're going to have a high turnover on Indian people within these facilities. They're going to be at the bottom, usually in the blue-collar places. The CDC certainly is not going to get into these kind of subjects on mental health events calendars, because if you do, you're going to end up with a profile on the gun issue that shows that the mass murders and so forth, including the drone strike operators. Drone strike operators are mass killers. They kill our innocent women, children, communities. So we have to get beyond the conversational hypnosis. You can kill, and as you said, the drive-thrus kill more than the drive-bys. That's a fact.
25 years ago, William, 25 years ago, they had just started opening up these malls, the shops in the malls with the video games. And I remember going in there and playing Asteroids, and one of the games was Missile Command, and I told my wife at the time, I think they're training our children for war. I thought the Missile Command was a war game. And today we've got drone strikes, and they're doing the same thing. It's the same game that I played 25 years ago in a Phoenix mall.
So, okay, we'll back up on that step, and we're going to come back to sumptuary laws.
Okay, I want to make one other mention here. On Thursday, I've got something scheduled that came across my desk this morning that says Big Pharma and the CDC, Center for Disease Control, is one and the same. Anyone who tries to argue with you that the CDC is looking out for public safety as its first priority just needs to take a glance at Dun & Bradstreet to see that the CDC is actually looking out for its own bottom line and that of its corporate allies, which brings us into our second place of evidence that the CDC is a corrupt drug-pandering sham. Many of the CDC's top health experts have ties to the pharmaceutical industry. An investigation by the British Medical Journal and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism found that 3 key scientists who helped develop the official swine flu policy for the World Health Organization, recommending that practically everyone be vaccinated, received cash payments from both Roche and GlaxoSmithKline two pharmaceutical giants that manufacture swine flu vaccines. These two companies, as reported by The Guardian in 2010, paid off policymakers in multiple countries, including the U.S., at the CDC, to write the World Health Organization's guideline for swine flu that pushed dangerous swine flu vaccines on millions of people globally. With the help of the CDC and other corrupt agencies, these pharmaceutical corporations pocketed billions of dollars. The tentacles of drug company influence are at all levels of the decision-making process, stated Paul Flynn, a British member of Parliament who spoke out against this racket as it was occurring. The CDC pushes fake science promoting deadly drugs and vaccines. The CDC has also been complicit in forging fake science to push other dangerous vaccines like the MMR jab for measles, mumps, and rubella. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. blew the lid on this scandal the same year, outing now shamed scientist Paul Thorson for stealing $2 million in research money while covering up the link between MMR and autism, which the CDC ate right up in its quest to protect the reputation of MMR. Top CDC scientist Dr. William Thompson has also since come forward as a whistleblower to expose the CDC for manipulating research findings that show MMR causes autism at a disproportionately higher rate in young black boys compared to other children, though MMR causes autism in all types of children, the same research found. As more and more vaccination propaganda appears in the mainstream media, it is crucial that American people become aware of the outrageous scam the CDC and the medical industrial complex are running, warns the Anti-Corruption Society. All that is needed is for folks to educate themselves and join the many good people, professionals and non-professionals, working to get the truth out. Comments, William?
So the way Introspect proceeds on this is different than a narrator of an article that's trying to get a lot into a limited amount of words and trying to reach the hearts and minds of people. The CDC and the corporations that associate with it are exemplified by the Simpson-Wood collaboration, and they're following collaborative governance protocols. Now, when you think of a predatory economy, what you find is pandemic injection points. You see the vaccines, you see the various mind-altering drugs, and an array of toxic input. These are all formed under sumptuary law. And basically it means that you regulate the habits of consumption in a predatory economy. That includes pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals that are franchised, they say licensed and approved by the USDA or whatever it may fall under. But understand that the CDC was put together to look at more pandemic level effects, but there are certain things it's not going to talk about, such as the laying out of the market campaigns at Simpson-Wood, which were a deal that followed the collaborative governance model, decision makers. Now, the sumptuary laws, they regulate the balance of trade, and they limit the market for expensive or not expensive imported goods. And what it does is it delivers high-end products to high-end society, expensive, and low-end products to low-end people, such as in Walmart. So when you're looking at these various economic channeling models, you have to look at them in their totality. A predatory economy certainly involves the marketing of vaccines and drugs of all kinds. And they serve the purpose of orderly exploitation in the community, meaning that the people in the community will not get crazy on you. They will be obedient and compliant. And when you look at the working papers and the goal, value, priorities, and so forth on most of your global level paradigms, you're going to look at compliance is very much there. And if you are a business, including pharmaceuticals, you're going to go according to an agreement, a trade agreement, such as NAFTA, CAFTA, or whatever it might be, TPP, North American Union stuff. When it relates to firearms, that applies too. That's part of a predatory economy, and it certainly is called the war is a racket, and there's a lot of money made off war. There's a lot of money made off... Oh, go ahead.
William, we got a caller here from the 775. I
Oh,
believe
go ahead.
this was in for Strick. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is me, Art George. Hey, I've been listening to you guys this whole time, and I really appreciate William's words, because he really describes the whole design of what's been going on here and what's going on with us all here in America. And what I want to say was the jihad of being the bar lawyers and judges, the conversational hypnosis is actually, I really see the design as you guys are talking, and as Clay's putting this part in of the thing that he's running his life. What I'm seeing is the conversational hypnosis. The crimes in America are a basis of the morals created or allowed. And so what we're talking about here is, or what you're talking about here is, they constantly got us into this mode of the ins and outs of all of this rhetoric. And the basis of reality is the original human being, man and woman, human beings. And the original people, the original indigenous people of this country, I continue to see how this conversational hypnosis keeps us motivated into talking about all these problems and all these ways that things could be done, things could be looked at, and where the problems are at. But there's no resolve. Because, like I said, the crimes in America are created by the artificial foreign sovereignty, created through illusion and artificialism. The original people, our position here to return back to this land is the remedy is original sovereignty. And who has this? And what is a moral society? Our original people, we're kept out of this mainstream of discussion. We're kept out of the ideals that are continuing to be created. And this country's been, I don't really know exactly how many years, but from the very beginning they came in, immigrants, and they came in very immoral. There was already a people here established in this country. We already had values, morals, and principles. And when everything was changed through churches and through the crimes against nature, for these people, these immigrants, to take over this land and to exclude the original sovereign people, it happens up to even today, as you guys are talking about these problems in America and gun control and the corrupt values that these people are working under, values neutral. And what they've done to us as original people is keeping us out through commodities, poverty, welfare, divide and conquer, and emotional sovereignty. These are words that are physical examples of what's happening to the original people. But I never hear that in the conversation. I never hear about the original people being sought after in order to include ourselves or induce some of that information in order to find a remedy. We're all trying to find a remedy in an artificial and illusion design, but there is no remedy in that. Because there's people out there that got so much money, so much power, that they'll just dry us out. They'll continue to keep us in the stupor, because we still don't talk about the basis of what it is we should talk about if we're going to actually make a remedy. The continuation of this process is killing the people, the original people, the elimination, annihilation, and exclusion of us. And I think to myself, I've been to legislature and tried to talk to in the hearings about the public lands or the private lands and the way that the land use is served. And while I'm over here at these hearings speaking on behalf of nature and land and my views, they take it really strong. People say, "Oh, that's good, you come in to talk." But you know, at legislature, at hearings on trapping and public and private lands, on the board sits a number of trappers and American hunters, and they decide how to protect our land and its use, which mining and economic development are a major factor involved in these issues. But that's not discussed, but it's directly motivated with the end results. Weaponized immigration. Just go on with. And so, like, I had one thought in my head that kept coming back to me every time you guys were talking about this and how to find a remedy and where the cause and effect is at here. And I remember one time we talked about this before, William. I think it was Prince William's statement, you know, and that's the son of the royal family. And that's who really owns this country. Who owns all of us. And what was the statement? Taking the rest of the assets of America. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, William, for me?
Yeah, and I have authored the Indigenous Identity Theft and Fraud Technical Brief. I'm looking at footnote 47 as Art is speaking, and he's literally right down the line of what we put in writing to make sure that because we cannot recall everything and re-articulate it without saying the whole thing. And the very premise of the ID theft was all things together. The indigenous sacred estate in the land was there before the intrusion. The genocidal, non-asymmetric warfare intrusion. And the killing was primarily done by the weapons in the hands of people that were on a mission from their God. Now, that meant that they had to do away with the superlative degree of human identity. And they set up their estates, which they felt were absolute estates. And it was present and future enjoyment. A lot of these words come up. But they really had to re-socialize into no values, no culture. That's what they had to do. They had to go into their idea of the world mind, world spirit. And these things came out of Europe that are just reciting words that were developed there. The treaty covenants go to what Art is speaking to. And that included the animals, the air, the water, the spirit, the creator of the universe. And it was an estate, it was an actual estate in possession. And it was an estate that would go on to children yet to be born. And the instruments that the people created were real. Now, it wasn't out of King James Bible and it wasn't out of the Latin language, but nevertheless, it was just as valid with just as much virtue and morality and all of those attributes of life as anyone else could claim to. And there's court cases like Boyd versus Simbold that address this, and it goes to customs and traditions. And then we get into things like these uniform acts that came in, and they're artificial, they're foreign agent creations. And all the way down to how do you teach people. And one of the things that came back is Congress wasn't supposed to be making any laws respecting the establishment of religion, free exercise, and so forth, but it certainly did. It went in through literally as a surrogate of the Vatican. In other words, the Vatican created the trust, and that trust became the Constitution of the United States. So there already was an overarching jihad in operation. Of course, you cannot call Roman Catholic faith or Christian religions jihads or Jewish jihads. You can't do that. It's not permitted. You have to pick on someone else. And the reason is that you're actually dealing with principalities, and you'll notice on the reservations that the churches were given sanctuaries within inside of the federal reservation. It was supposed to be only faith, only church, but it has mutated into economic development corporations, such as in the various reservations throughout the United States, under values neutral. It'll always come back to the prepossessory aspects and the attributes that people were sovereign people in their own right. In other words, in the people's case here within this northern continent, they were there before, and then someone came in with foreign articles and said, we're better than you. You are the savages. And I'll remark again, Hillary Clinton referred to the other people, the targeted people, as savages. But we see that makes a full circle, and there is a spiritual savagery in the war on terror. And I'm not talking about those people that blow back and try to attempt reprisal or retribution. I'm talking about the predatory serial warfare conflict against a state of spirit and mind.
All right, we're out of time here. William, Art, thank you for being with me. And Art, I do want to talk more about the original people here and the civilizations that were here in North America and South America that I think were superior to the ones we have today. And the fact that we can't build what the South American indigenous people built 1,000 years ago, we can't build that today. So I'd like to talk about that in a future show. We'll set the date. Keep an eye on freeamerican.com. You can make donations to support the show at freeamerican.com. God bless you all, and the links are up there for Introspect. You can review everything, the work that William and Art have done. Thank you both.
Thank you, Clay.
God bless you all. Yes, do you need to go outside? Where's my bandit, my packy? Bandit, come on, baby. Packy, good boy. Good boy. Come on, let's go. Come on, boys and girls. Seaver's driving over to Midland for her.
Yep. Oh, these are ice cream.
Yeah, those are ice cream.
Put these in the freezer. You talked about those the other day.
Oh, I may go to work too, but.
Yeah?
Yeah, they need bell ringers still for,
Oh,
and I did it 1 year for them.
what's in here?
I did it once. Yeah.
I gotta go through
Oh,
all
you
that.
gotta keep those.
Finish.
You got
I do.
in here,
That's not gonna be bad at all.
right here, right now.
I use that.
But anyway, I gotta finish filling out my application
Okay,
and drop it back off before 3 o'clock.
okay. Hi there, you three good-looking dogs. Oh.
I gave him some of your silverware to use temporarily.
Okay, baby.
Yeah, I know, I got some pictures. I'll keep the plastic.
Jeff, take one out of my mouth.
What?
Jeff, take them out of my mouth.
Take what out of your mouth?
Silverware.
No,
Okay, then it's okay.
you had stuff over here for right. I let him use your coffee pot because it was a toaster in there.
Okay.
That's probably the only thing we use is a loaf of bread and creamer. Oh.
Your coffee maker works right, Cliff?
Yes, sir.
Sammy?
What is this? This is-
That's a bar, candy bar,
What?
it's a,
Oh, macadamias, oh, really?
what, like it? I can't do so.
Yeah, we can have that. Clay, don't throw this envelope away. I need this envelope for this, this thing. It's got zip codes on it because we had to fight to get the zip codes.
What's that?
We had to fight to get the zip codes. This is something I gotta do this afternoon.
Okay.
This has got his address on it, this has got that goes back to Harris's number. I'm looking for this. We're making a decision right now.
Okay.
Today is barbecue chicken, baked beans, potato salad, carrot, squash, fruit cup. You ate it?
I'll leave that.
Okay, I won't. So you guys can go eat, we were gonna go Chinese or that.
Very good.
So, you guys can eat now.
And I'll go through that stuff that I got.
Let's, the coffee maker worked until, unless the, mice, unless the mice used it, for a hot tub or something.
I don't do it. When I opened the microwave, I told her I opened the microwave, and it was plate. That chicken that
Yeah,
on it, I
Marty.
just ate there for a week.
Oh, here's the free cocktail over your mouth.
Okay.
Do you have a,
Can you bring me the foil on that TV tray?
On TV tray where?
In the office.
Here. Okay, you turn the, let me see. Do you want right hand time or left hand time? You want right hand time or left hand time?
When I go through my stuff, I'll bring the stuff, you know, like if you can shoot and stuff like that, but I don't. Because I know I don't. This one, that stuff, I don't. You gotta use stuff.
Yeah, I know you don't like them. Yeah, I'll make you the spaghetti, I'll make, lasagna. And then you can have a little on
You know, vegetable type stuff that you do.
I don't know if you can.
No. You know why? Live on the back of it, you know, it's salt. I don't do salt.
That's common.
Those I'll do, they're almost like Oreos.
That's what I thought they'd been there. How about soda? Those don't have milk.
No, I don't, oh, and I can buy the milk. Actually, it's surprising those places.
You'll get it. You might get milk tomorrow from the,
Oh, down there.
That's no,
When's the one down there? I'm gonna put this out in the car.
Okay. Oh, on the car till I get out there, I think it's locked.
Well, I can put this on the other, we ain't taking Margie with us, so.
No, we're not taking her right now.
Get my coffee.
I can take you then. I can't go to the 14th, so I can take you Monday. Oh, I gotta give you some money. He used his freaking money for me. And finally, donating it money. Had the heater on. Oh, God. And that's why I don't like liquids down here. 'Cause they spill.
Darling,
What?
it says Verizon Wireless will not let me do long distance.
Hold on a second, I have to go in here and I have to put this stuff down so I can get to the.
Oh, here.
It's your dang Wi-Fi has not got data again, probably. Somebody's texting me. I told her found it, but-
Pretty sure my other one does here.
God, my feet are killing me. Come on, get out of there. Come on. Come here. I don't know which way yours gets out of. Get me in the home page. Damn, it's been a long day already. Wi-Fi's on mobile networks. Off. Okay. Off. Off. On. 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 Come on, turn on, damn it. Okay. On. Okay. Back. Back. Which way's your back? Back. Back. Oh. What number are you trying to call? This
Herb
one?
Havens.
Yeah, your Wi-Fi was... It's because of your data usage. I have to reset it up again. Hold on, Herb. It's Clay. He's got to plug you in.
Hey, Herb. Pretty good. I didn't get anything on the fax yet.
Let me give you the number again for her.
Oh, you emailed it? Okay, well, then I'll
That's
check
why I didn't
that.
get it.
I'll get it. Did you get the one I emailed you? Okay. I'll go to the VA today and see about the community service today or tomorrow.
As soon as we download the paper, we'll go this afternoon.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and make the first payment here just to get the ball rolling. Okay, I sure will. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Now, let's send it. Where do you have to make the payments to?
He said he emailed it to me.
Okay, well, you'll have to print that off. And you probably have to do most of it after we...
Here's Haven's Company.
What kind of dog is this one right here?
Rat carrier.
I was gonna say because it had a tail clip, and they don't use most dogs' tails.
No, that's a rat carrier. That's
City of Tucson website for payments is at here.
Here.
We need to get going.
I know, but I gotta let Sam out because he's let Sam out.